We're on the edge of Wild Park Local Nature Reserve Brighton, which is about 15 to 20 minutes walk from our home. And for 5 years I used to do a UK butterfly monitoring scheme transit here, which is why I know that occasionally you can come across a grizzled skipper. Now the grizzled skipper has diminished its distribution in the UK by 50%, which is why it's on the Biodiversity Action Plan for the UK. And as a consequence it's protected by the NERC Act under section 41 in England and section 42 in Wales. So this begs the question, how did it get to this state? And as a consequence, what can we do to help it recover?
About the children.
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, this film is dedicated to Jude and Leafa Holton. They're my greatest fans. To get to know the grizzled skipper a little better, my first port of call was to spend some time with an expert. Tom!
Hi Dan, good to see you.
Good to see you too, Tom.
Yeah.
Well, it's a lovely day, isn't it?
Absolutely brilliant. What a fantastic day, fantastic place, and wonderful view as well.
Well, I've never been here before, but I know for you this is pretty special, isn't it?
It is a special place actually. It's one of the 4 main study sites where I did my PhD on the grizzled skipper, and I haven't been back since, so it's just
How long's that, Tom?
too long ago. It's probably 1996 was the last time I was here, so over 20 years.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned your PhD, and of course that's why we're here. Your PhD is renowned as a classic example of like an excellent study on the British butterfly.
It's nice of you to say that, Dan.
Well,
yeah.
I've had a look at it, and I have to agree, it looks astonishing. It's really good.
Yeah, I was a pretty good field ecologist at the time, and it was a great opportunity to study an insect and just get out in the field, get the sleeves rolled up and really understand the sort of ecology of the butterfly. So spent many happy hours over sort of 3 or 4 years, dawn till dusk, out studying the butterfly.
Well, I'm just champing at the bit to see this insect.
Me too.
Shall we go and have a look?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's go. Okay, Tom, so what can you tell me about the history of this insect?
It's been known for a long time. I think it was one of the first British butterflies to be named, and probably because it was quite widely distributed in England and Wales.
Yeah.
Unfortunately though, over the last century, the 20th century, it seemed to undergo a marked decline in distribution.
Do we have any idea what that's about?
I think the decline in coppicing, loss of semi-natural habitats, ploughing up of chalk grassland, and just general intensification of grassland habitats has caused its demise. Although on the positive side, the creation of brownfield habitats has benefited the butterfly.
Yeah, actually, it's quite an odd butterfly when you think about it, because it's a specialist that seems to have a range of habitats.
That's right, yeah. It does occur in sort of coastal dunes, brownfield, woodlands, grasslands, but when you look close up, the habitat structure on a fine scale is pretty much the same at every site.
And that's really what it's about, looking at it from the butterfly's point of view.
Absolutely.
So Tom, I mean, when I was setting up you saw a couple of grizzles, but I've not seen any yet.
It's surprising really, considering how many eggs we've seen scattered through the site, that we haven't seen any adults together, but we're back in the spot where I saw them earlier today, so let's keep our fingers crossed.
Tom, look there.
Oh wow, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I mean, it's obvious why it's called the marsh fritillary in the old days, isn't it? Because it's got that checkerboard look.
Yeah.
But also, it amazes me that beautiful fringe of the black and white.
It's gorgeous patterning, isn't it? Very intricate. Yeah, just lots of white spots and a really nice sort of brown sheen to them as well at this stage in the season.
Tell me, have you ever seen that aberration? The one which has got, what's it called? The one which has got the nice...
Is it Apteris, I think?
That's right, yeah.
No, I haven't actually, no. So,
Taurus was never really a part of the focus of this video, in part because Tom Brereton had said in the 4 years he did his PhD, he never once saw it in West Sussex. And yet, I was talking to my really good friend here, Richard Roebuck, and you have a different tale to tell me from an undisclosed location in East Sussex.
Yeah, I saw a posting of a Taurus, and I'd never seen one in West Sussex at all. So I went out of my way, went and had a look, and found absolutely nothing. Anyway, I continued thinking about that, and I came back to the same spot a year later, and it was sort of early morning, and within 10 minutes I found a Taurus, and it was just an amazing sight to see. But not only that, I found another 11 Taurus individuals all in the same area.
Incredible.
But no normal ones.
None at all.
Absolutely no normal pattern ones.
Now that's absolutely astonishing, because of course we've come here today and I've come and found exactly the same thing. You know, we found 7 Taurus here and 1 normal. And if you read Neil Hume's account in his book, The Butterflies of Sussex, he says, of course, that this is a recessive gene that you'd expect to express itself at 25% level. And we're seeing way above that. I mean, what do you think is going on?
Yeah, it's in a very localised area, and it's surrounded by trees on this sort of field area, and then it's an industrial area on the other side. So I think they're a very localised population, so perhaps the recessive gene is expressing itself more.
Oh, because it's a restrictive gene pool.
Yeah.
That makes so much sense. And now you say that, it makes me realise that if you read Colin Pratt's book, and he talks about there being absolutely no Taurus records in West Sussex, but loads in East Sussex. Does that mean that this fragmented habitats for the Grizzled Skipper in East Sussex are not in West?
Yeah, well, could well be. The landscape is quite different. I don't know. Yeah.
Now, while we're on that subject of a mystery, look at this here. This is absolutely incredible. This here is a video. Can you see that?
Yeah.
I mean, it's incredible, isn't it? On the one side, you've got the Taurus expression, and on the left-hand side, it's a normal butterfly. So this was sent to me by a guy called John Chappell down in Cornwall, and I'm absolutely sure that this is a male, so it's not a gynandromorph.
Yes. Yeah,
and so my view is that we're looking at something which has a bilateral asymmetry, suggesting, therefore, that this Taurus gene is not sex-linked.
Yeah, maybe so. Yeah, it's all a bit of a mystery, really, isn't it?
It is, but it just goes to show with butterflies there's always so much more to learn.
You did right. There's always something to see. Every year is different.
Richard Roebuck, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
So Tom, what makes good Grizzled Skipper habitat?
Well, we're walking through some perfect habitat here, Dan. A good Grizzled Skipper habitat would have a number of features that meet the resource requirements of males, females, the adults, but also all the immature stages.
I see.
And this habitat's got the lot. So you've got a nice scrub edge there, a warm sheltered spot where the males will try to form a territory to meet passing females. You've got a sward that has scrub in it, long grass, short grass, so variable microclimates, lots of bare ground, and there's lots of the caterpillars' food plants spread through it. So plants like agrimony, wild strawberry, creeping sancfowl, but also coarser plants like bramble as well. There's lots of nectar sources that the butterfly uses here as well. Things like buttercup, Germander speedwell, daisies. So not very rare plants, but ones that are very important for the butterfly.
So Tom, what can you tell me about the natural enemies? I mean, parasitoids is particularly interesting, but anything else?
Yeah, the adults do have natural enemies. Spiders cause quite a bit of predation, both the ones that have webs in the air and those on the ground as well. The female egg-laying females can get caught up in webs on the ground, and then both sexes can fly into webs and get eaten by spiders. One of the other insect predators is the robber fly as well. They can they attack and kill a range of butterflies, from something as big as a marble white to a grizzled skipper.
Right.
So the sort of patrolling male butterflies that congregate on the edge of scrub are particularly vulnerable to predation by robber flies. In terms of parasitoids, that is a big problem for many butterflies. Can have huge population effects, things like tortoiseshells and red admirals and things, but in my PhD I didn't find a great deal of evidence for for parasitoids causing problems. For example, I raised about 50 caterpillars through to maturity over a 2-year period, and none of them were parasitised.
Oh, were you surprised?
I was, yeah. You'd expect 1 or 2 even to show a sort of low-level effect, but they're all healthy. I never found any dead caterpillars either that have been parasitised. I think I found the perfect habitat here, Dan, for the egg-laying females. This is classic conditions. So we've got a nice big patch of loose soil, which creates a very hot microclimate. If you put your hand on that, you can feel the heat there.
It's remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah, it's nice and warm. Poke your finger in there and you can feel how cool that is.
Big difference.
It can be sort of 10-15 degrees hotter here, and that's really important for butterflies like the Grizzled Skipper, which are on the edge of their northern range margin in the UK. They really need the hottest microclimates to complete their development successfully. So that sort of reflected heat off the bare ground means the eggs will hatch more quickly. So what tends to happen, you've got, as I say, this big patch of bare ground. A female will be on an egg-laying flight, and then it appears to be a sort of search image, the bare ground. They'll drop out of the sky, walk over plants until they find one in the rose family. In this case, it's a nice big agrimony plant with these pairs of leaflets and a terminal leaflet.
Another agrimony, yeah.
Yeah, once they find the agrimony, they will curl the abdomen underneath and lay an egg on the underside. That egg will take about a week to develop, and the larvae will walk onto the upper side and form a little area of silk above it as a shelter, and it will feed by grazing at the surface of the leaf. So if you look at this leaf here, you can see the characteristic feeding damage and a bit of residual silk there from the very first efforts to eat of the caterpillar. Once it's fed on there for a while, it will, as it's grown in size and become more sort of powerful and bigger, it's then able to sew a leaf together and form a better shelter. So we can see a bit further down the leaf, this is the next place the caterpillars move to. It's a tent with the leaves sewn together by the caterpillar's own silk. So it will graze at the edge of the leaf here, pop its head out and eject some frass out the other end, and gradually eat itself out of a house and home. Fat bramble can be very important for the later stage larvae.
I see.
Yeah, because as they grow bigger and get a bigger appetite, basically, they need to feed quickly, and the bigger, rougher bramble leaves are very attractive because they're the biggest sort of leaves that are available to them.
Well, it begs the question though, Tom, if bramble is a food plant, why don't we see this butterfly everywhere?
I think that the problem is that it needs the earliest stages. The larvae are tiny, just like 1.5 millimetres long, and they're not capable of eating coarse bramble leaves. If you were to look under a microscope at a bramble leaf, you can see how thick and hairy it is. And a little caterpillar, early stage, just can't physically eat it. But the big final instars are capable of chewing through them, so they become the ideal food source later on.
So it's late May now. When would you expect, first of all, to see the first eggs?
Yeah, so we're coming up to the peak period. It's traditionally late May and early June is the peak for adult abundance, but the first ones will have been out in April, and so any time from the first week in April the adults can be on the wing. Eggs tend to hatch after a week or so, and they'll live as a caterpillar for about 3 months and then go into pupation in the autumn. When I did my PhD, the pupation was around the time of the first frost in September, but we don't get those anymore, so I'm not sure what the cues are for them to go into pupation.
I see. Now, Tom, in the wild, have you ever seen the animal pupate?
I have, but I've cheated partially. It was actually rearing the caterpillars till the point where they become sluggish, and they want to pupate then. I release those into the wild and within a few hours I could see where they were pupating. But at the end of the day, they didn't seem to be that selective. They would choose a range of heights and vegetation structures to pupate in, generally well concealed in fairly dense vegetation, but not as fussy or selective as the egg-laying females or the caterpillars. So that was the end of that, really. I think more research needs to be done, I think,
Right.
on the sort of requirements of the pupal stages.
I see. Has anyone, to your knowledge, documented a wild found pupa?
I think they have been found, but there's just not a great deal of evidence on that area, just because they are so well concealed.
I see. Right. So there are so many caterpillars here at the moment.
Yeah.
And yet, of course, we don't see tons and tons and tons of butterflies. So what are the key factors in this butterfly's life cycle? What really gets you? Any idea?
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's difficult to. I wasn't able to build sort of life tables that can give you that information. They're pretty poor at finding the food plants. They always move on to different plants over the course of life, feed on perhaps 12, 15, 20 different individual plants. Once they leave one, they're absolutely hopeless at
Right.
finding others. I've seen them walk, sort of crawl or walk, whatever you call it, past plants within 1 or 2 centimetres and completely miss them.
So that begs the question then.
So if food plants are at low density, they might sort of just simply not find.
Yeah, so it begs the question, does the female go for high density areas when she's laying? Is she in any way selective?
They are very selective, but it's really driven by the microclimate.
What other studies did you do in your PhD?
Yeah, the PhD consisted of following the adults and working out what the habitat requirements was, and the larvae as well, so that was a big part of it. But the other main aspect was the population study, which involved catching them in the net and giving them a unique mark with ink from an overhead projector pen.
Right. So was this like different colours for the units and tens and that
Yeah,
sort of stuff?
there is like a standard way, but I came up with my own system using different coloured pens and marks for different units on the front of the wing. And with that system, with 3 different pens, 4 different places, you could mark up to 10,000.
Wow.
Which I didn't get near that. But,
No, but that's remarkable.
I did catch, I think, 1,600 individuals.
Ooh.
And recapture rate was quite high, about 40%. So that proved really that, well, a few things. One, that the populations were generally quite small, because we had a project with butterfly conservation volunteers to sort of show that about 90% of the populations, there'd be less than 50 individuals on the peak day, which is quite small. But a big site, there could be 600 on a peak day and then up to 2,000 over the season.
Goodness.
So that would be a big population. So that's one interesting thing you get from mark recapture by catching them. The other thing is that high recapture rate that I mentioned, that shows that the vast majority of individuals that emerge on a site, they'll spend all their life there. And so the conservation really does depend on getting the management right at that site, because they're largely sedentary.
Yeah.
You get some dispersal to nearby sites and some longer range movements as well, but as I say, the vast majority are small scale. But it is amazing at what you can learn from marking individuals. You can work out what their sex ratio is, how long they live, and
an astonishingly powerful technique then.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it showed that the majority live about 7 to 10 days, but can live over a month. Some of them.
Really?
Yeah, the longest.
That must have been very unexpected.
Yeah. Sorry, the longest was 29 days, which is for a little insect is amazing as an adult.
You marked them. Were you able to use that information to work out where you marked them from and where they're recaptured?
Yeah.
Could you figure out how far they flew?
Absolutely. The main study site was Chanctonbury Ring in West Sussex, and that was a brilliant place to study because it had both a north facing and south facing slopes with colonies of Grizzled Skipper scattered in both. And each time I caught one, I noted exactly where it was with a GPS. And
can I ask you, what did you use for that? One of these handheld devices?
GPS, yeah.
Fantastic.
That's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
But it just makes, the hunger to catch every one, because as you know, Grizzled Skipper, it doesn't generally occur in high numbers. So the next one you see, it could be that fascinating one that's moved a long way, or could be the longest lived one, so you're just really hungry to catch every single one.
I can imagine that as well, because it's such a simple technique and yet you gain so very much from it on so many levels.
I mean, you could find interesting things like the north facing slope, the butterflies peaked and emerged about a week later, even though they were only separated by about 50 metres of farmland habitat. It also showed that woodland and agricultural farmland, cereal fields and intensive pasture, they really do restrict movement. Even if they're open habitats, very few butterflies would cross those. So at Chanctonbury, the different areas where the butterfly was in were largely separate, but connected by occasional movements, so it's like a classic meta-population. And to preserve the butterfly there, you needed to have a range of patches, because a lot of those sort of separate areas were small, and naturally you'll get extinctions and recolonisations, so you do need to maintain a network of populations to conserve the butterfly. You need landscape scale conservation, really.
Tom, how do you manage for this then? Is this just standard grazing?
This is grazed, I think it looks like it's grazed by sheep, which can be a problem if they're grazing at this time of year, because they can take all the nectar out, but it doesn't seem to be spring grazed, this site, so that's good. It means there's lots of nectar. So the management is a mixture of grazing by sheep or cattle. Cattle are a bit better because they poach the ground and create those bare patches that are important. So grazing in the just winter grazing seems to be enough, and then some periodic scrub grazing. Periodic scrub clearance. We can see at this site the scrub is really starting to come through, and it will need cutting at some point to knock it back. But that's also beneficial. When you clear the scrub, you get more bare ground again, which will create habitat for the egg-laying females.
Tom had mentioned that brownfield sites could be good locations for habitat restorations for the Grizzled Skipper. This resonated with something I'd heard before.
Come over here, we can see this creeping sankful, one of the main food plants, especially on brownfield sites for the Grizzled Skipper. And if you look at egg-laying opportunities rather than just amount of creeping sankful, there's a huge patch of creeping sankful there, but no egg-laying opportunity. It's all amongst grass. None of that would ever be used by a Grizzled Skipper. None of that would ever be used by a Grizzled Skipper. So you can say the food plant's abundant, but the egg-laying opportunities are nil. But suddenly, 1, 2, 3 leaves are ideal for egg laying by a Grizzled Skipper. And if I was searching for eggs, what you do normally with a pen is just turn the leaf over, and those are the only 3 leaves I'd ever check for an egg of Grizzled Skipper if I was searching for eggs. So check none of those, and I have done this in the past and you find none, so just confirming that. But so just those 3 possibilities. And again, this is what explaining to farmers we try and do, that because they're used to putting nutrients into soil, whereas this is basically little bits of chippings of rock with very minimal soil, and it's been gone over with a JCB and compacted, so it's absolutely ideal for wildflowers, and in this case creating habitat for both the Dingy and Grizzled Skipper.
So you think that compacted soil is a good thing?
Yes, compacted soil is a good thing.
Okay, and what about going around and bashing chunks out? I mean, I'm translating what you're saying to chalk grassland. So
Yeah.
if I'm bashing chunks out,
So
ripping up the turf.
Yeah, so if you use a mattocks, and basically what you're trying to do is, it's always about mimicking nature. So in this case, if you use a mattocks and you're taking chunks of soil out, and especially getting down to the subsoil or bare earth and bits of rock, it's really imitating cattle poaching, because cattle in a wet season will create exactly the same things. Rabbit scrapes will do exactly the same thing as well.
It was clear that there were very real parallels between what Tom Brereton had learnt through his studies of the Grizzled Skipper and what Mike Slater had discovered as a consequence of his habitat restoration work. I then asked Mike if he could show me a brownfield site where he'd put this into practice.
At the same time we put the kidney vetch seed and birdsfoot trefoil seed in, we also put several plugs, and I think that looks like the original plug plant. And what it's done now is it's sent out runners of creeping cinquefoil and it's colonised this whole patch. So if you compare this with the place we've just come from and you look at egg laying opportunities rather than the abundance of the food plant, you'll see that the abundance of the food plant is probably exactly the same. But now if you start saying how many egg laying opportunities the Grizzled Skipper's got, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, quite quickly you've probably got about 50 egg laying opportunities here in this one small area, compared to the same density of food plants in the previous clip where there was only 3 egg laying opportunities.
The importance of bare ground in raising temperature for developing eggs and digesting caterpillars was clear, but then Mike threw annual variations in climate into the mix.
Well, I think they need something over about 40 degrees C. So again, this might be in its high 30s, which makes it marginal. So this is an area that might be used in a very warm spring, but would never be used in a cool spring because it'd never warm up probably enough for it to use. So again, I think in warm springs, the egg laying opportunities increase because the ambient temperature of the bare ground, which will build up the temperature when the female is looking for somewhere to lay, there'll be more of those.
And finally, in an ingenious attempt to further increase temperature at ground level, Mike has also experimented with adding a mulch of type 2 roadstone around the base of butterfly host plants, a practice that could be very beneficial if adopted more widely.
Where do you see things going for the Grizzled Skipper?
It's a bit worrying really for the butterfly to have its worst ever year last year. It is a species that's suffered from conservation management actually at some sites by too much of a uniform approach to management.
Yeah.
We've seen today how what a varied structure it needs on sites, and quite often conservation management has just been too general and targeted at uniformity for certain botanical communities. So that has been a problem. The other worry, I suppose, is climate change. We don't know what effect that's having, and we don't understand why it hasn't benefited from climate change, why it hasn't been able to spread north. But on the positive side, we've demonstrated with some of our butterfly conservation projects that if we get the habitat right on sites and do that in a network at a landscape scale, we can really turn around the fortunes of it.
It's really interesting you say that, because you might be aware of my own chalk grassland habitat restoration work at Dorothy Stringer School and around Brighton and Hove. And we've been really successful at getting colonies of small blues, and we've been successful in at least getting Adonis to breed for a short period of time and chalk hills to come in. But I've never seen a dingy or a Grizzled Skipper come to our sites.
Yeah.
And in a way that, in part, relates to what you've seen here and the other place you studied, where you saw that they're quite a sedentary butterfly. But I've heard that said by so many butterfly ecologists, and I'm not always sure that I believe it.
I think a lot of marking studies in the 1990s on the rarer species suggested that butterflies are very sedentary, and that's true for the majority. But of course, the ones that you don't recapture, you've just no idea how far they go, because most of those studies, like mine, were at a fairly small scale. So if something moves 5, 10, 20 kilometres, you won't detect that through marking studies. So we did tend to underestimate how far things move, and studies of butterflies like the silver-spotted skipper and the Adonis blue has shown that actually we can colonise.
Yes, we can. You can't ignore that, can you?
Quite some considerable distances, more than we previously thought.
And I think also, in some senses, at the time when many of these sort of mark recapture studies were taking place, butterfly populations, particularly in the 70s, were at a low ebb, weren't they? And so the sort of density-dependent effects which might lead to butterflies dispersing were not perhaps always happening in the sites where the people were studying them. And one of the things which I've realised through doing habitat restoration work, of course, is you're doing it from the other end. You're seeing if it's coming to you.
Yes,
and
I think that's the best way round to do it, is create habitat at
Yeah.
different distances and wait for the results.
Yeah, well, it's just like having honeypots. It's a bit like sugaring for moths, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
I
think an important point is people have to be patient. We always want results in the first year of like a restoration project, and there's a temptation to put things back too quickly. I've seen lots of examples where people have wanted to reintroduce butterflies to areas that they almost certainly will colonise. But if we let nature take its course, we can just learn so much more.
Tom Brereton, Professor, Doctor, I don't know what to call you. It's been a great day. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Dan. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It has been lovely, hasn't it?
It's been brilliant. Thank you.
If we're to halt the decline of the grizzled skipper, we need to apply the fine-scale management techniques that both Tom and Mike have described. This needs to take place on any existing sites where the butterfly is found and where habitat restoration is being undertaken. So to conclude, here's a fantastic example of a 12.5 hectare landscape scale conservation initiative that incorporates these approaches.
So this site came up because of the NIA project, Nature Improvement Area project, back in 2012. We were looking for sites along the South Downs Way corridor. This was close to triple SI and had become overgrown. It should be really good chalk grassland. It's a local wildlife site and it's open access land. And we attracted millions of funding to create a corridor habitat from Winchester to Eastbourne using the South Downs Way as the corridor and following the Lawton principle of bigger, better, more connected. So it was connecting up pieces of chalk grassland that either we could expand or improve. So once you've got the money, you then have to go through landowner permissions. Are the landowners on board? It's obviously we're coming onto their land, which is their business. They need to make money and they need to be able to farm that land. As well as Natural England with the triple SI up the top. There's only so much you can do on a triple SI, but luckily this was a local wildlife site, so it's not quite as tight restrictions. The main clearance was done with a digger, so one guy in a big digger coming down the slope, literally ripping gorse and blackthorn out of the ground, which looked really destructive at the time. But now you've got disturbed habitat, you've got lots of bits of bare ground, and at the time, because of the scarp slope, we wanted to keep that nutrient free. With burning, you end up with renutring into the soil, so we got him to burn everything at the bottom of the slopes and keep the main slopes nutrient free. So about a year into the project, I started speaking to people from butterfly conservation about what we could do to improve the area for specific butterflies. Was there anything specific that they wanted us to do? When we walked the site, was that it would be a really good site for dingy skipper and grizzled skipper. So there was wild strawberry already here, so could we expand that out and create some clearings, some sheltered areas? So to make that work, we basically, instead of doing a linear strip, which we'd done the main connection, was now to create clearings off the main highway, as I'm going to call it, so that you've got little sheltered areas, and where you've got strawberry, maybe scraping the ground out a little bit more, so if you've got excess vegetation, it can move in. There was always the intention to graze the area, because obviously with mass scrub clearance, if you don't graze it, then your scrub's going to grow back. So we brought the cattle in, and having that little bit of bare ground where plants are just moving in is the ideal place for egg laying. The farmers were really supportive of all this. So when I first approached them, they told me that it was fenced off back in the day with the war and ploughing and stuff, and it was really unproductive, so it got fenced off and forgotten about, and they never had the time or the money to do anything about it. And they've responded brilliantly. They're so interested in the site now with all the butterflies. They send me pictures of butterflies and moths and plants and ask me what everything is, and it's absolutely fantastic to see. So with countryside stewardship, at the moment it's HLS, but we're moving into a new elms version. It's called ELMS because it's the Environmental Land Management Scheme, and it's a new countryside stewardship programme for farmers to enter into to help them farm wildlife friendly. And we really need farmers to be on board with conservation work as well as getting their farm business to work. So having farmers like this that can make the business work for them, so they get the grazing back and we gain the wildlife, but they also benefit from the wildlife too.
After the filming at Well Bottom had finished, we took a walk to see how the butterflies were faring. In an hour we clocked up about 16 species, which I think is quite impressive after just 4 years' work on this 12.5 hectare site. And the Grizzled Skipper was one of those species that seemed to be doing particularly well. So it is possible to manage farmland to get butterfly species back. Now it's clear that there are many examples of where the Grizzled Skipper has spread to new locations or where population sizes have increased because of sympathetic management changes to existing colonies. However, if I want to see this butterfly in any numbers, I need to get in my car and drive to some special, often protected site, and that just doesn't seem right to me. Over the last decade, many of us have had our focus on increasing the presence and population sizes of butterflies in urban environments. And now I'm beginning to believe that we should really be turning our attention to the new Environmental Land Management Scheme to change this focus towards the wider countryside. Butterflies are used as biodiversity indicators, so why should we not expect every farm to have populations of every butterfly species that they potentially could host? We're going to be paying farmers to manage the land for the betterment of biodiversity. Why not set the bar high? Now, if you've enjoyed this film and are not a member of Butterfly Conservation, please consider doing so. Just go to their website, butterfly-conservation.org, and press the green Join tab on the top right-hand side of the website. Thank you.
What's this one?
Oh,